let's zoom out and take a look at the bigger picture of what we're studying when we're looking at ethics now. So in order to do that, take a look by analogy at the study of geology. If you're a geologist, there's lots of different questions you're going to want to ask about rocks. So the first thing you're going to want to do is go down and look at the bottom here and look at a bunch of individual rocks and study them. Take a look at what they're like, what their hardness is, what they're made up of, that kind of thing. But eventually you're going to want to ask some more abstract questions. Namely, you're going to want to ask, well, what different kinds of rocks are there, and what kind of principles can I use to figure out which rocks fit into each different category? So if you're a geologist, you usually use something like the causal history of the rock. So if the rock is made from molten lava cooling, well, then it's the igneous type of rock. If it was instead made by organic matter or sand or something like that being compressed under high pressure, well, then you categorize it as being sedimentary rock. So we've got the study of each individual rock, then we've got the study of the different kinds of rocks and how to put different rocks in those different kinds of rocks, but then we can also move up a whole other level and ask even more abstract questions like, well, what even are rocks in the first place? Or even, do rocks exist at all? Is that even a coherent thing to study in and of itself? So these are all questions you can ask about geology, and these are also the sorts of questions that you can ask when you're studying ethics. So take a look at how we can take a look at the things we study in ethics in much the same way. So instead of looking at individual rocks, we can take a look at individual actions that people perform. And for each of those individual actions, we can ask, well, what kind of an action is it? Is it morally wrong, or is it morally permissible? And then we can move up a whole other level and we can ask these much more abstract questions. We can ask, well, gosh, what is it for something to be morally right or morally wrong? Or we can even ask, do moral properties even exist in the first place? And so what we have there are these different kinds of questions we can ask when it comes to ethics, corresponding to these different levels of abstraction. And we've got some nice helpful names for them. Now, we've already studied two of these. So down at the bottom there, practical ethics is just the name for the study of individual actions, where we take a look at a particular action and try to figure out, is that morally right or morally wrong? So what we were just doing in studying this question of whether abortion is morally right or wrong, and in which particular circumstances is it morally right or wrong, that would be an instance of practical ethics. We were looking at individual actions and trying to categorize them as being morally right or morally wrong. So we've already done a little practical ethics. We've also gone way up to the top. We started at the top at the very start of class asking these meta-ethical questions, these really abstract questions like, well, what is it that makes moral properties exist in the first place? Are moral properties objective? Are they relative? Do they even exist at all? So we've studied some meta-ethics. We've studied some practical ethics down at the bottom, but now it's time for us to take a look at the category in the middle, study normative ethics. And normative ethics is just the study of, well, what general principles do we categorize actions into being either morally okay or morally wrong. And we can have different theories about what makes the difference between which actions are morally okay and which actions are morally wrong. So what we're going to do the next couple of weeks is look at a couple different alternative theories of what those principles might be. So that once we have some of those principles in hand, that will give us a further ability to start trying to answer these more practical ethical questions, like, is abortion morally okay? When you ask a practical ethical question like that, you usually start out with a question in which, well, lots of people disagree about it. So what we want to do is move up a level to this normative ethical plane and ask, well, okay, so we've got some disagreement about whether abortion is morally right or wrong, but can we maybe agree about just some general ethical principles that we can use to decide which actions in general are morally wrong and which actions in general are morally okay? So normative ethics is the search for what those underlying principles are. And so what we're going to do is take a look at some different theories of normative ethics. And the first one that we'll take a look at this week is called deontology. So deontology is a family of theories about normative ethics, which just says that the difference between what's morally right and morally wrong is whether an action is something that respects other people's rights and whether the action is one in which you are performing your duties. So I'll come back in another video and we'll get deeper into the weeds of just what deontology says and how different theories of deontology can tell you how to separate out wrong actions from permissible actions.